There is a strange assumption we make about intelligent people. We imagine that if someone can understand complicated things quickly, solve problems other people struggle with, and see connections that others miss, then life must be easier for them. But intelligence is a strange kind of problem, because sometimes the mind that can see more also has more to see. A highly intelligent person may walk into a room and notice the tension before anyone says anything. They may hear a sentence and immediately recognize the contradiction inside it. They may make a decision, then spend the next 3 hours imagining every possible consequence of that decision. They can understand why someone behaved badly toward them and still feel hurt by it. They can recognize that an argument isn't worth having while simultaneously thinking of 12 different ways the argument could have gone. And sometimes they aren't struggling because they don't understand what's happening. They're struggling because they understand too much of it. Imagine someone named Daniel. Daniel is the person everyone calls when something goes wrong. His friends ask him to solve problems. His coworkers trust his judgment. His family thinks he's incredibly mature. But there's something they don't see. At night, Daniel replays conversations. Not because he doesn't know what happened, he knows exactly what happened. He remembers the words, the facial expression, the pause before the answer, the change in someone's tone. And then his mind starts asking, what did they really mean? Why did they say it that way? What if I had responded differently? What happens if this becomes a pattern? The very mind everyone praises during the day can become exhausting when the world becomes quiet. And that's what makes this conversation interesting, because being highly intelligent isn't simply about knowing more. Sometimes it's about experiencing your own mind differently. Now, this doesn't mean every person with a high IQ is lonely, anxious, sensitive, or an overthinker. Intelligence isn't a personality disorder. It isn't a diagnosis. And a high IQ doesn't automatically make someone emotionally fragile. Research actually paints a much more complicated picture. Studies of intellectually gifted populations have found mixed results when it comes to emotional and behavioral difficulties. But there are certain patterns worth understanding, and some of them are surprisingly uncomfortable. Some people think deeply. Other people can get trapped inside their own depth. There's a difference. A highly intellectually engaged person may naturally enjoy examining ideas, finding connections, questioning assumptions, and exploring possibilities. Research on need for cognition and intellectual engagement shows that these tendencies overlap with, but are not identical to, intelligence itself. And that's important because the problem isn't necessarily having a powerful mind. The problem can be having a mind that keeps working after the problem is already solved. Think about a simple message. Someone texts, "Okay, that's it." 2 words. A relaxed person might read it and move on, but an overactive mind might start investigating. Was that okay annoyed? Was it cold? Did something change? Should I ask? Would asking make things worse? Maybe they're busy, but what if they're not? Suddenly a 2-word message has become a psychological crime scene. And the strange part, the person may know they're doing it. They might even tell themselves, "Stop thinking about it." But that's not always how repetitive thinking works. Research consistently links worry and rumination with poorer sleep and difficulty settling the mind. So the mind keeps searching for certainty. One more possibility, one more explanation, one more piece of information that might finally make everything make sense. But life rarely gives us complete information. And that's the trap. A brilliant mind can solve problems, but uncertainty isn't always a problem that can be solved. Sometimes there is no hidden answer. Sometimes I don't know is the final answer. And learning to tolerate that can be harder than solving the original problem. Imagine you're standing at a crossroads. Most people see 2 roads. You see 12. You can imagine what might happen if you choose each one. You can calculate the risks. You can predict possible consequences. You can picture how different decisions might affect your career, relationships, finances, family, and future. Sounds useful, right? Until you're the person who has to choose. Because having more possible explanations can sometimes make certainty harder. A person who sees only one obvious option may move immediately. A person who sees 10 reasonable options may keep comparing them, and comparing becomes another form of delay. This can show up in surprisingly ordinary situations. What career should I choose? What city should I live in? Should I stay in this relationship? Should I accept this opportunity? Should I send this message? Should I quit? The problem isn't always indecision. Sometimes it's overanalysis. You don't lack information, you have too much of it. And every new piece creates another branch. This happens, then that could happen. But if that happens, maybe this changes, unless this person reacts differently. And suddenly, you're not making a decision anymore. You're attempting to predict the future. But intelligence doesn't give anyone a crystal ball. Eventually, there comes a point where additional analysis stops improving the decision. It only makes the decision heavier. That's one of the quiet skills intelligent people have to develop, knowing when thinking has stopped being useful. Here's one that can be misunderstood. A highly intelligent person isn't necessarily bored by everything, but someone with strong intellectual curiosity may need complexity, novelty, challenge, or meaningful engagement to stay interested. Research distinguishes need for cognition from intelligence itself, but shows that intellectual engagement is related to cognitive ability and personality traits such as openness. That distinction matters, because boredom isn't always arrogance. Sometimes it's understimulation. Imagine being in a meeting where you've already understood the central problem, but everyone spends another 40 minutes discussing the same point. You are now angry. You're not trying to prove you're smarter. Your mind is simply looking for something else to solve. And this can become frustrating when other people interpret your lack of enthusiasm as disrespect. At school, it might look like, she doesn't care. At work, he's difficult to motivate. In conversation, she thinks she's better than everyone. But sometimes the truth is much less dramatic. Their mind needs something to engage with. This is also why intelligent people can become obsessed with seemingly random subjects. One week, it's ancient civilizations, then neuroscience, then filmmaking, then economics, then why octopuses are so strange. Then somehow it's 2 a.m. and they're watching a documentary about something they didn't even know existed yesterday. That curiosity isn't necessarily random. Intellectual exploration can become rewarding in itself. But there is a downside. When your internal world is constantly hungry for stimulation, ordinary repetition can feel unusually flat, and that can make routine environments difficult to tolerate. This one is subtle. You can understand someone's behavior without feeling understood by them. You can recognize why someone is angry, why someone is defensive, why someone lies, why someone withdraws, why someone behaves selfishly. You can practically map out the emotional logic behind their behavior. But understanding someone doesn't automatically create intimacy. Imagine having a disagreement with a friend. You understand exactly why they're upset. You can see where their reaction came from. You even recognize that their behavior is connected to something that happened years ago. So you explain it calmly, and they look at you and say, why do you always analyze everything? And suddenly, you're no longer having the conversation you thought you were having. You were trying to understand. They wanted to feel understood. Those are not always the same thing. Sometimes intelligent people become so focused on explaining an experience that they accidentally move away from actually experiencing it with someone. Because people don't always want analysis. Sometimes they want, that really hurt. No theory, no psychological framework, no explanation. Just recognition. And that can be a powerful lesson. Understanding an emotion isn't the same as validating it. Sometimes connection begins where analysis ends. There is a particular kind of loneliness that doesn't come from being physically alone. You can be surrounded by people, laughing, talking, participating, and still feel like you're operating on a slightly different frequency. Not necessarily because you're smarter, not because everyone else is less intelligent, but because your interests, questions, intensity, or way of processing experiences may not always match the people around you. Imagine telling your friends, I've been thinking about whether happiness is something we create or something we discover. Girl, it's 11 p.m. Go to sleep. They're not wrong. And you're not wrong either. You simply wanted to go somewhere mentally that they didn't want to go. This becomes difficult when someone repeatedly feels they have to shrink their curiosity to fit the room. So they learn to keep certain thoughts private. They stop explaining why something fascinated them. They stop asking certain questions. They become selective about who gets access to their inner world. And eventually, people may describe them as reserved. But reserved isn't always disconnected. Sometimes it means, I don't feel like explaining this part of myself to everyone. There is an important distinction here. Feeling different doesn't mean you're superior. And being misunderstood doesn't mean everyone else is incapable of understanding you. Sometimes it simply means you haven't found enough people who speak your particular psychological language yet. Now, we need to address something often exaggerated online. You will hear claims that highly intelligent people automatically have extreme emotional sensitivity. The evidence doesn't support such a simple rule, but research has explored emotional processing and hypersensitivity in highly intelligent and gifted populations, including studies involving Mensa members and newer systematic reviews of sensory processing. The findings are interesting, but they do not justify saying that every high IQ person experiences emotions more intensely. So let's talk about the experience without turning it into a stereotype. Imagine someone who doesn't simply notice that their friend is upset. They notice the tiny change in their voice, the hesitation, the fact that they stopped making eye contact, the sentence they avoided finishing. They may pick up information other people overlook. And when you notice more emotional signals, you can sometimes have more material to process. A movie scene may stay with you. A person's rejection may remain emotionally significant long after the conversation ended. A piece of music can bring back an entire period of your life. Someone else may say, "Why are you still thinking about that?" And your honest answer might be, I don't know. Because sometimes emotional processing doesn't happen at the speed other people expect. The danger is when sensitivity becomes self-surveillance. You start monitoring yourself constantly. Was I too emotional? Did I talk too much? Was that reaction reasonable? Why am I still affected by this? And now you're experiencing an emotion while simultaneously analyzing the fact that you're experiencing it. That's exhausting. You don't always need to interrogate a feeling. Sometimes you can simply feel it. Here's where intelligence can collide with expectations. If you're often praised for being capable, you may quietly build an identity around being capable. You become the smart one, the responsible one, the person who always figures things out. And eventually, mistakes stop feeling like mistakes. They feel like evidence. Maybe I'm not as capable as everyone thinks. So you try harder. You prepare more, you check again, you rewrite the message, you delay submitting the work because you know it could still be improved, and the standard moves again and again until good doesn't feel good enough. This is where perfectionism becomes dangerous, not because wanting to do well is inherently unhealthy, but because concern over mistakes and doubts about actions have been associated with anxiety. Meta-analytic research has found these particular perfectionism dimensions to have small prospective relationships with later anxiety symptoms. And the irony? The intelligent person may know perfection is impossible. They understand it intellectually, but emotionally they may still chase it. Imagine a student who gets 94%. Everyone around them says, "That is amazing," but they're staring at the 6 marks they lost. Not because they're ungrateful, because their mind has already identified exactly where they could have done better. And this can follow someone into adulthood, the perfect career, the perfect body, the perfect relationship, the perfect response, the perfect version of themselves. But there is no finish line. Eventually, you have to learn something that intelligence alone cannot calculate. A life does not become meaningful because nothing went wrong. Sometimes the unfinished version is still worth living. This may be the most humbling one, because intelligence doesn't automatically create discipline. It doesn't guarantee emotional regulation. It doesn't prevent procrastination. It doesn't make someone immune to fear. And it certainly doesn't mean they'll always make good decisions. You can understand a problem perfectly and still be emotionally stuck inside it. You can know that someone isn't good for you and still miss them. You can know that procrastination is hurting you and still open your phones. You can understand the consequences of a choice and still make it. Why? Because human beings aren't logic machines. We don't make decisions using information alone. Emotion, habits, reward, fear, identity, environment, fatigue, relationships, and countless other factors influence behavior. This is why intelligence should never be confused with wisdom. Intelligence may help you understand the map. Wisdom involves knowing where you actually want to go. And sometimes the smartest person in the room still has to learn something painfully ordinary. Knowing isn't the same as doing. Perhaps the hidden struggle of being highly intelligent isn't intelligence itself. It's believing that intelligence should protect you from ordinary human problems. It won't. You can understand anxiety and still feel anxious. You can understand relationships and still fall for the wrong person. You can know exactly why you procrastinate and still procrastinate. Because self-awareness doesn't make you less human. It simply makes you more aware that you are human. And eventually, after spending years learning how the world works, you have to learn how you work. What do you actually want? What are you afraid of? Which relationships give you energy and which ones drain you? Those answers can't be found in intelligence tests. They require honesty. Maybe you don't always need to analyze the thought. You don't have to solve every uncertainty, explain every emotion, or turn every mistake into a lesson. Sometimes an intelligent mind needs to rest because you can become so focused on understanding life that you forget to actually live it. So perhaps intelligence isn't having the loudest mind in the room. Maybe it's knowing when to quiet it. to feel without dissecting, to accept uncertainty without fighting it, to say, I don't know, to say, I'm letting this go. Because a highly intelligent mind can take you incredibly far. But eventually, you have to decide where you want it to take you. Human behavior always leaves clues. And sometimes the most interesting person to understand is yourself. Until next time, stay curious.